Jayam Vishnupara Paramahamsa Paribhajacharya Ashtottara Shishiman Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jayam Vishnupara Paramahamsa Paribhajacharya Ashtottara Shishiman Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Thakur Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Shad Goswami Ki Prem Se Kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Radha Shiva Shri Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopagopina Shamakunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Vrindavan Dham Ki Mayapur Dham Ki Gangamai Ki Jamunamai Ki Tulsi Devi Ki Bhakti Devi Ki Samabhadda Bhaktivinoda Ki Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Brihat Mridanga Ki Nitai Gaur Premanandi. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to Shri Guru Shri Gauranga. Hare Krishna. So just last time we covered two verses, verse 9 and 10, which are very, very closely related. The ninth verse speaks about how Dharma is meant for self-realization. And the 10th verse, how if we have we have sense gratification, but that's not the objective of Dharma. Sense gratification is meant to preserve the body and to preserve oneself and one's family. And everything else should be directed toward Tattva Vigyan. So now this verse, which is probably one of the most quoted verses of the Bhagavatam by Srila Prabhupada, this verse explains what is that Tattva Vigyan. So this is progressive. And I've chosen this series of verses because these verses are the introduction to the whole rest of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So I'll read this verse to first canto, second chapter, verse number 11. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Vadanti tattvavidas tattvam yajkyanam advayam brahmati paramatmati bhagavan iti shabdyate. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth call this non-dual substance Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavan. So the purport. The absolute truth is both subject and object. There is no qualitative differences there. Therefore, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan are qualitatively one in the same. The same substance is realized as impersonal Brahman by the students of the Upanishads, as localized Paramatma by the Hiranyagarbhas or the yogis, and as Bhagavan by the devotees. In other words, Bhagavan, or the personality of Godhead, is the last word of the absolute truth. Paramatma is the partial representation of the personality of Godhead, and the impersonal Brahman is the glowing effulgence of the personality of Godhead, as the sun rays are to the sun god. Thus, intelligent students of either of the above schools sometimes argue in favor of their own respective realization. But those who are perfect seers of the absolute truth know well that the above three features of the one absolute truth are different perspective views seen from different angles of vision. as it is explained in the first sloka of the first chapter of the Bhagavatam. The supreme truth is self-sufficient, cognizant, and free from the illusion of relativity. In the relative world, the knower is different from the known. But in the absolute truth, both the knower and the known are one and the same thing. In the relative world, the knower is the living spirit or the superior energy, whereas the known is inert matter or inferior energy. Therefore, there is a duality of inferior and superior energy, whereas in the absolute realm, both the knower and the known are of the same superior energy. There are three kinds of energies of the supreme energetic. There is no difference between the energy and the energetic, but there is a difference of quality of energies. The living entity, the living being in contact with the inferior energy is illusioned, thinking he belongs to the inferior energy. Therefore, there is a sense of relativity in the material world. In the absolute, there is no such sense of difference between the knower and the known, and therefore everything is absolute. Omagyanatimirandasya jana sharakaya chakshur ummilitam yena tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Hare Krishna. So this, when Dhritarashtra left for the forest after being chastised by Vidura, he was told that you're just maintaining yourself like an old dog, like a family maintains an old dog. And Prabhupada says there that previously there was one Dhritarashtra, and now there's one Dhritarashtra in every home. So Dhritarashtra, he knew Krishna, and he knew Krishna was the absolute truth. But just some theoretical knowledge is not enough to really understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And here we see why. The majority of people in this world, if they even reach the point, as the Bhagavatam says, Aruya Kritrena Param Param Tata Pasantyaro Nadvishkan Yusman Angaraha, that even though impersonalists or great knowledge seekers go through so many austerities and penances to reach the position of Brahman, they must eventually fall away from that position because they have not been able to grasp the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is the problem, that Brahman, yes, it is spiritual. It is the same. There's no difference ultimately between Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan qualitatively. They're all spiritual. There's nothing material about them. But there are differences. And those differences, I'll just go over a little bit, those differences. And by doing so, we can understand a little better. So Brahman, as we know, means the spiritual energy. So that Brahman is, let's see, there's something happened here to my, so that Brahman is, just 1 second. I had one note here that I wanted to refer to. Yes. So that Brahman is the same. Otherwise, there's no distinction between the energies and the energetic. It is all spiritual energy. It is all sat. It is all of the same spiritual nature. So even though Dhritarashtra had seen Krishna, had spoken with Krishna, had admitted that Krishna was the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he could not understand the nature of Krishna. So, in that sense, because all three are in this verse, Badanti Tattvavidas, those who are Tattvavidas, or knowers of the truth, Badanti Tat, they say that these three energies are Jnanam Advayam. So it's easy to understand Brahman as Advayam, or no difference. But Advayam also, just like we see Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he met with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, Sarvabhauma explained the Atmaram verse. And then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explained it in so many different ways and said, yeah, actually, I could keep going. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was famous to show how there are so many ways we can explain the Bhagavatam in the proper way, because the Bhagavatam has to go beyond seeking or looking for knowledge. So therefore, the Bhagavatam can be explained in so many ways. But when you're trying to explain just general knowledge and not apart from the Bhagavatam, there are so many meanings that one can derive from logic, as it says in Mahabharata, that Tarkopachishta, that by logic we can never understand the full absolute truth completely. Shutayo Bibinam. And by different religions, there are so many religions. There's the Muslim religion, the Christian religion, the Hindu religion, and different offshoots. Those are the three main ones. Different offshoots. And everyone is fully convinced that my religion is the best. Only someone like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu can really convince someone, like he did with Shankazi, because of his spiritual influence, but very difficult to convince. Sometimes Srila Prabhupada would meet a Mayavadi, and Prabhupada wouldn't, after hearing them for 1 or 2 minutes, he would just speak. He wouldn't let them speak again. Generally speaking, they would not be convinced, but anybody else hearing would be convinced by Prabhupada's arguments. So therefore, Shrutayo Bibinam, it's very difficult to establish the absolute truth from a particular religious point of view. Yashabrisir Yashamanam Nabinam. And if we refer to different philosophers, they're generally very proud and they construct their own philosophical understanding. So therefore, Dharmasya Tattvam Vihitam Guhayam. If we really want to understand the highest nature of the absolute truth, Mahajana Sapanta, we have to follow the Mahajan. And therefore, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he would explain by logic one argument, then he would ask everyone to defeat it. No one could. Then he would defeat it with another argument. He would again ask, no one could defeat it. He would defeat it again. And then he would ask anyone to defeat it, and no one could do so. And then he would defeat it by the first argument. So, in other words, he was showing how logic, although a very nice instrument in general to, be able to debate, is not absolute. It is not Advayam. So Brahman is Advayam. It's totally absolute in there's no distinction between the energies and the energetic. There's within Brahman. And as far as Paramatma, the pathway of the yogis, they're also the Paramatma, although directly doesn't have so many energies that he manifests, because he manifests more energies in his previous form of Garbhodakshay Vishnu. And previous to that form, Karanodakshay Vishnu, he manifests more energies. But no one manifests so many energies as Bhagavan. But because Paramatma has a form, although he's localized, just like Brahman is everywhere, Paramatma is everywhere, but he has a form everywhere. Just like it says in the Srimad Bhagavatam, second canto, second chapter, that Kechit swadehantu vidaya vakshaye parishamatram purusham vashantam chaturbhujam kanjaratam gashanka kadam daram dharanaya shmaranti. Others conceive of the personality of Godhead residing within the body in the region of the heart and measuring only 8 inches, with 4 hands, carrying a lotus, a wheel, a chariot, a conch shell, and a club, respectively. And also in Bhagavad Gita, in Bhagavad Gita, 13th chapter, 15th verse, Savindriya gunabhasam Savindriya vivarjitam asaktam sarvabhrichaiva nirgunam gunabhukti cha. That the super soul is the original source of all the senses, yet he is without senses. Otherwise, Sarvendriya Guna Basam. All the senses come from him, but he's the source. He's the source, but yet he has no material senses. Sarvendriya Vivarjitam. And he's unattached, although he is the maintainer of all asaktam sarvabhrichaiva. Asaktam, unattached, even though sarvabhrichaiva. Generally, if we create something, just like now they're having the Olympics in Tokyo, and so you see whoever wins, they're jumping up and down. They thought, I did it. I won this. I won that. But they're totally attached. And many times it's been recorded that people who win these at a very early age in life, they win some gold medal or something. They were at the peak, and then afterwards they can't do it, and they become very depressed. So their attachment, as all attachments, lead to lamentation. Just like Arjuna's attachment in Bhagavad Gita to his family members, to his grandfather, to his teacher and cousins, etc., led to lamentation, which was not approved of by Krishna. So this is Paramatma. He transcends the modes of nature, and at the same time, he is the master, Nirgunam. He has no modes of nature, Sarvabhukti Cha, but he is the source of all the manifestation of the modes of nature. So this is Paramatma, and so Paramatma has form and has some very insignificant manifestations of energies, and therefore he's called Advayam. There's also not such a big manifestation, but when we come to Bhagavan, then that's very different. Bhagavan has, as it says in Shvatishvataru Upanishad, that Tasya Karyam Karanam Chavijite, that Krishna is the one person who has absolutely nothing to do. Of course, Brahman doesn't really have a whole lot to do, but he doesn't do much. He exists. And Paramatma has a lot of things to do. He has to instruct every animal, every human being with instincts, with thoughts, with remembrances, with forgetfulness, and knowledge according to their karma. So many things to do. As a matter of fact, Srila Prabhupada's godbrother from Germany, who came to see Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur in, I can't remember the year, but there were no airplanes, or if there were airplanes, he definitely couldn't afford it. And so he came by steamship. And then he landed in Bombay, and he traveled across India. And when he arrived in Calcutta or Mayapur, he offered his obeisances and he said, "My dear Lord, now I understand what you mean." Speaking to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, when you quoted the verse, Natasya Karyam Karanam, that Krishna has nothing to do. I saw so many deities, even deities of the Lord, like Varahadev. He's holding up the earth. You know, and different forms of Vishnu who are fighting and killing demons. But Krishna is just holding his flute and smiling. You know, he has nothing to do. He's the perfect retiree. You know, people want to retire and they think, well, when I retire, I can play golf, I can do this, shuffleboard, or, you know, maybe something more invigorating depending on one's physical condition. But they can never do that. So, just like one devotee, I was invited to, his father was the consulate, was the Salvadorian consulate in Mexico. And he came to the temple to see me. He said, my son had become a fanatic from your religion. So I said, I don't know why, you know, our religion is very logical. So I sat down for 2 hours. I explained to him the whole philosophy. He said, that's wonderful. He said, my son never said it like that. So, you know, very soon I'm dedicating my beach. I'm retiring from government service. I'm going to dedicate my beach house, and I would like you to come and do some of your ceremony. I said, okay. So I'll pay your ticket. So I said, okay, even better. So he paid my ticket. I went there. The program was supposed to be on a Thursday. And on Tuesday night, he left his body. You know, he had been building this house for like the last 15 years, plans to retire. You know, but he couldn't do it because he left his body. Anyway, we went ahead and had the ceremony and chanted Hare Krishna and dedicated it to his honor, so his family was happy. So the point is that Krishna is the perfect retiree. You know, he's always retired. One of his opulences, of course, he has 6 opulences. Aishvarasya samagrasya, viryasya yashasa shriyaha, jnana vairagyayoshchaiva. Vairagya, he's always detached. He's always detached. He's always retired from material nature. And so so Krishna has, the point is that Krishna, in the form of Bhagavan, he has these opulences. Aishvarya, Viryasya, Yashasa, Shriyaha. So he has all these 6 opulences. He has strength, fame, beauty, knowledge, renunciation, and unlimited opulence. So, when Srila Prabhupada was in Tehran for the second time, it was 2 Muslim boys who were just joining Krishna consciousness. And so Prabhupada explained to them that your Shah, the Shah of Iran, he has so much opulence, but Krishna has he has unlimited universes. Your Shah has so much gold and oil, but ultimately he will die and lose all of this. But Krishna eternally has all these things. So in that sense, Advayam means the Shakti. Binatvam namanamino. There's no difference between Krishna and his name and Nam Namakari Bahuda Nija Sarva Shaktis. And he has unlimited energies which are simply part of him. As the verse goes on in the Swatasvatara Upanishad, that it says, Tatshamas Chabikas Chajishate. And no one is equal to him. Therefore, that's another a definition of Advayam. Advayam means there's no second. And because he has nothing to do, that's Advayam. That's very unique. Another meaning of Advayam. And having no equal. And that all of his energy, he has unlimited energies. But what's happening with those energies? Swabhaviki Gyanapala Kriyacha. Swabhaviki means automatically, by his own arrangement. Automatically everything is happening, and therefore there is complete oneness. Even though there's so much variety, all that variety is being perfectly intertwined and causing so many wonderful, beautiful, transcendental pastimes of Krishna. So this is This is Bhagavan, the unique quality of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that was Vishnu Purana. Vishnu Purana has another verse, which is to emphasize these six qualities. Jnana Shakti Balaishvarya Viryate Jam Shishataha Bhagavat Chabdavachani Bina Heyair Kunadibi. The word Bhagavan means to be endowed with unlimited knowledge, sense power, bodily strength, power of control, influence, and beauty without inferior. Now, this beauty without inferior is very important because Krishna's beauty, as it says, Uddhava said to, when he was thinking about Krishna, speaking about Krishna, and so he spoke to Maitreya and he said, Param Param Bhushana Bhushanangam. He said that in the case of Krishna, he is the beauty of his ornaments. Otherwise, beauty without inferior means that his beauty is so great that his beauty makes his ornaments beautiful. Just like when Krishna is crawling around into the houses, sneaking into the houses of the different cowherd ladies, what is happening? They say, I don't know what kind of jewels he has, but they're all, they light up the whole place. And that's how he sees. Otherwise, our storerooms are very dark. We keep the butter. If you know anything about farming in the old days before refrigeration and everything, you kept, especially in India, you kept things sometimes underground or in something that had very thick walls, and so the heat would never get in. So how did Krishna do that? Because Bhushana Bhushanangam, because he is the source of beauty. And therefore, his jewels become ecstatic by touching his transcendental body, and they light up. And therefore, Krishna and Balaram, of course, Balaram also has that same ability. And then they can see everything. So this beauty without inferior, knowledge without any challenge. So therefore, Bhagavan is the absolute truth. And even though there's an eternal difference between him and the living entity, they are both from the superior energy, and therefore that is Advayam. So any way you look at it, that Bhagavan has the greatest manifestation. Just like Lord Brahma, he said, Aho Bhagyam, Nanda Gopa Vajau Shakam, Yat Mitram, Paramanandam, Purnam Brahma Sanatanam. How greatly fortunate are Nanda Maharaj, the cowherd man, and the other inhabitants of Brajabhumi. There is no limit to their good fortune, because the absolute truth, the source of all transcendental bliss, the eternal supreme Brahman, has become their friend. Otherwise, Lord Brahma is just amazed that the opulence of the residents of Vrindavan, that they have such great they have such superior energy. And of course, when Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was traveling on his way to Vrindavan, he met Raghupati Upadhyaya. And Raghupati, he spoke one very beautiful verse, Shrutim apare shmitim itare bharatam anya bhajantu bhavabhita. That means so many people are referring to the Shrutis, and other people are referring to the Shmitis. Other people are very attracted to Mahabharata because bhavabhita, because they are afraid of material nature, and therefore they situate themselves. They go to the scriptures to get rid of their fear, their anxiety. But he says, as far as I'm concerned, aham iha nandam bande yasyalinde param Brahma. He says, I don't worship Krishna. I worship Nanda Maharaj. Because Nanda Maharaj has the absolute truth crawling around in his courtyard. Therefore, who can beat him? And then he says later on that there's another verse that he says that he says, but this is even more unbelievable. Kam pati katayitum mishe sampratim kova patim ayatu gopati tanaya kunje gopa vaduti vitam Brahma. He says, who can I speak to? Who will possibly believe me when I say that Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is hunting the gopis in the bushes on the river Yamuna? In this way, the Lord demonstrates his beautiful transcendental pastime. So otherwise, not only is the understanding of Bhagavan greater, but it is unlimited. And therefore, Raghupati Upadhyaya says this, who is going to believe me if I say that absolute truth? Just like Indra, he could not believe that the absolute truth below whom everything is operating, who is his master and his Lord, is playing leapfrog in Vrindavan. He said it couldn't be, has to be another Krishna. He was thinking like, has to be another Krishna. Although being such a prominent demigod, he was praying to Krishna in the womb, in the womb of Devaki. And he was praying and praying and praying, and still he couldn't understand that same Krishna who was there in the womb. But he was thinking, well, maybe he stayed somewhere in somewhere in Dwarka or somewhere in Mathura. Couldn't be the same Krishna, even though we were led to believe he was thinking like that. We were led to believe he was exchanged. I think he wasn't exchanged. It was just a trick. So understanding Bhagavan is not an easy thing. Understanding Brahman, Aruya Kritrena, as I just quoted, requires years and years and years and thousands of years of meditation and austerities and penances. Just like in the Brahma Samhita, it also says that the jnanis are meditating on that absolute truth for thousands of years, and they can't distinguish it. They can't really distinguish. They can't really understand that supreme absolute truth, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So when we speak about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Chaitanya requested that devotee he asked him many questions. So he said, can you compose a verse that just describes the Supreme Personality of Godhead completely? And so he said, this is a beautiful verse. This was composed by Raghupati. Swayameva param rupam purim madhupuri bara payam kaishorakam deyam adyam eva paro rasaha. The form of Shamasundar is the supreme form. The city of Mathura, or Vrindavan is included in Mathura Mandal, is the supreme abode. Lord Krishna's fresh youth, otherwise Kaishorya age, should always be meditated on. And the mellow of conjugal love is the supreme mellow. So this is the condensed understanding of Bhagavan. This is the conclusion that we come to by hearing from these great devotees. Now, of course, we know that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he went to Mathura, when he went to Ramakeli, and then he went on to later, he went on to Varanasi, he was challenged by the Mayavad sannyasis. Why are you chanting with these fanatics? Why are you, these low-class people? Why are you dealing with them? And so, he said to Prakashananda Saraswati that actually, because they couldn't understand, they thought that being a devotee of the Lord just sentimental. Of course, even Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he demonstrated what that sentiment, that we have to reject the sentimentality, because the Vaishnavas that he saw, the Krishna Bhaktas that he saw in general during his time in the beginning of his youth were rolling on the ground and, chanting all kinds of things and faking. And some of them would put some hot chili in their eyes to shed tears and do different things to make their hair stand on end. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he was more attracted to Christ than to the object, the supposed object, Krishna, because although he had heard about Krishna and Lord Rama by the doorman, when he was in a very opulent position when he was young, he heard about and he loved the stories about Krishna, but he couldn't understand why the devotees of Krishna were like this. But then when he found Lord Chaitanya, he said, I was immediately attracted to Lord Chaitanya because he reminded me of Christ. He's a Manjari. Of course, this is obviously Yogamaya, but this pastime was there to demonstrate that we should not think of Krishna sentimentally. We should understand this jnana, the Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. And therefore, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, I think I might conclude with this particular understanding of explanation. When Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is explaining, he doesn't do many commentaries on the Bhagavatam, but especially on the 11th canto, but he was very astute in philosophy. So in his commentaries on the 3 verses that explain the Kanishtadikari, the Madhyamadikari, and the Uttamadikari, he said this. He said that the Kanishtadikari, although he understands Krishna in his deity form, although he certainly doesn't understand Krishna and his devotees, but he does understand Krishna in the deity form. Therefore, his level of realization is on Brahman. Otherwise, even though he understands theoretically, has some understanding, here's the deity is Krishna. His level of understanding really doesn't go beyond Brahman. And therefore, Lord Chaitanya, when he was explaining the creeper, the Bhakti Lata, he said, be very careful that your Bhakti Lata doesn't reach Brahman. And then after reaching Brahman, it becomes, like stuck there. Like sometimes creepers, they go up and if there's a ceiling, they just grow sideways. They said, make sure your creeper doesn't get stuck there. And then Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said that the Madhyamadikari, generally speaking, of course, this is not some absolute thing, but generally speaking, the Madhyamadikaris, their realization is on the level of Paramatma. Otherwise, they see the Lord with a form. They understand Krishna as a form. They understand Krishna's devotees are their friends. They understand that the ignorant living entities are the objects of their compassion, and they try to avoid the demons. Even though Prabhupada didn't avoid he didn't avoid anyone. He was like fire with the demons. And only really the Uttam Adhikari really fully understands Krishna to the greatest extent. And therefore, when the Bengali devotees who were accompanying Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, especially Gopinath Acharya, there was one Bengali poet who came and he had this poem about Lord Jagannath. So he heard the poem and he was in rapture. He said, Mahaprabhu must hear this. He told Swarup Damodar. Swarup Damodar said, no, you're just a sentimental cowherd boy, because actually his Gopinath Acharya and Krishna Lila is a cowherd boy. So he said, no, you're just sentimental. So he kept insisting, and finally Swarup Damodar said, all right. So they sat down, and the Bengali poet came in very happy. I'm going to, everyone's going to hear my wonderful exposition. He started on the first line. Swarup Damodar shouted, on your first line, or first two lines, you have committed two grave offenses. You say that Lord Jagannath, who has a wooden body, so you're offending the Lord, saying that his body is made of wood. And he said, and the soul of that body is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Therefore, you're comparing Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to a jiva. And then he blasted him to the point he was almost ready to leave his body. No. But then finally, because the devotee is naturally compassionate, he said, therefore, it is incumbent upon you to study this Srimad Bhagavatam and study all the transcendental literatures in the light of transcendental devotees of the Lord. Machchita magata prana bodhyantas parasparam katyantas chamam nityam tushanti cha ramanti cha. Then you will be able to experience the real happiness and bliss of Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, you're doomed. You've committed offenses against the Lord twice. And so the Bengali poet took it upon his head. He started associating with devotees. But the point is that even though those were direct associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who were certainly Mahabhagavatas, but because they were also in Krishna Lila with Krishna, but because of enabling this pastime, Prabhupada said they were on the neophyte platform. So even though one may be very elevated, one's understanding may not be complete. And therefore a devotee, sometimes even great devotees, are shown to lack some knowledge or to lack something, or they're simply inquiring as if they were, they were not sure of some point, because they're teaching us the process of Badanti Tattavidas, Tattvam Atganam. They're teaching us this Jnanam Advayam, how to understand the absolute truth. And of course, the next verse pretty much confirms that Bhagavan is the supreme. And we may get into that next verse at another point, if you allow me. So I'll stop here and see if there's any questions, comments.
Maharaj,
yes.
I could ask, since the devotee of Bhagavan has a higher understanding of Sambandha, or his relationship with God, even if he is like a neophyte devotee, is he better off somehow than advanced aspirant of Bristol Brahman, who may be on the Brahma Bhuta platform but isn't devoted to Bhagavan? How do they compare?
Yes, of course. These devotees that I just referred to were not, they were not neophytes. They were not Kanishtadikari. But Prabhupada said their understanding, otherwise by Yoga Maya, whatever, they demonstrated a neophyte understanding, just like Arjuna demonstrated a neophyte understanding. So sometimes Krishna takes his dear devotees and puts them in that position, because a devotee is naturally humble. So when a devotee, a real devotee, is put into a difficult situation, he simply takes it as Krishna's mercy. Tattenu kampam susamikshamana. And he accepts that mercy in any way that it comes. So they're not really, but yes, they are much better than a very advanced aspirant of impersonal Brahman. Just like one time in Bombay, Srila Prabhupada sent out 2 devotees to preach, and they met one Mayavad who was very learned Mayavadi, and he just, shot verses at them from all kinds of scriptures, and they were bewildered. And they came back to Srila Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, we were defeated by a Mayavadi. And Prabhupada said, this is not acceptable. I have given you second initiation. You must know that even with 30 verses from Bhagavad Gita, you can defeat any philosophy. And so Prabhupada said, you must study. On another occasion, I can't remember where it was, but Prabhupada was reading Chaitanya Charitamrita, and he read the 3rd verse of the 1st chapter of Adi Lila. And he asked the devotees, how many devotees know this verse? That particular verse describes that the Lord is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even though he takes the form of Brahman and he takes the form of Paramatma. For some, he is the absolute truth and he is the Supreme Person. So Prabhupada considered that to be a very important verse, which everyone should know. And Prabhupada said, so how can you call yourselves Brahmins? So actually the point is, we should really understand what Prabhupada expected of us, especially now we're in the 125th, coming up the 125th anniversary of Srila Prabhupada's birth. We should equip ourselves, as of course, this is the next verse that in the Bhagavatam, that one should be equipped with transcendental knowledge. So Prabhupada expected that of us. And that's why I'm reading these verses, because it tells what is expected of a devotee in order to be able to carry out Krishna consciousness properly.
One other point, someone that has a relationship with Krishna, but they might be a sahaja, how do they compare with a Mayavadi or a Brahmavadi?
A sahaja, Prabhupada says in one place in Chaitanya Charitamrita, although he definitely cuts them down, but as I remember, it's the 7th chapter of Adi Lila. Prabhupada says, of course, they are some kind of devotees, speaking of sahajiyas, but because of their offenses against the Lord, they can't realize their position as a devotee properly. Now, Brahmavadi has the opportunity to realize Paramatma and to realize, which was actually the position of Dhritarashtra. He was not a Mayavadi, he became a Brahmavadi. And gradually he elevated himself because of being exposed to Krishna. Just like Aghasura, when he left his body, just when he left his body, he kind of, hovered over the body for a minute, and Krishna came out of the mouth of his ex-body. So he attained, he attained Vaikuntha. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that he didn't attain Krishna Loka because he never worshiped Krishna, because there has to be service to Krishna to attain Krishna Loka. But because he saw the form of Krishna, then he was able to attain Vaikuntha. And so the same with Dhritarashtra, because he saw Krishna and he understood Krishna was the supreme, but he didn't have the full understanding. But just by seeing Krishna and understanding Krishna as the supreme, he eventually was elevated to understanding that Krishna, maybe a limited understanding of Brahman, of Bhagavan, that he could go to Vaikuntha. So a Brahmavadi has that opportunity. And of course, he's not committing offenses as long as he's a Brahmavadi and not a Mayavadi. So it's difficult to say, because the sahajiyas, they perform so many offenses, they can cover the opportunity. But whatever service they do, whatever sincere service they do, that's also, neha vikramana shasti prachabayo nividyate, as Krishna says, that there's an eternal benefit, even if it's just a little bit of service. So sometimes they do some service, the sahajiyas. But better to just be a standard devotee in ISKCON, and then we can avoid all those pitfalls.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. Anyone else have a question or comment? Or
please feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question, comment, takeaway, appreciation, whatever you like.
Hare Krishna, Gurudev.
Hare Krishna. Hi.
You spoke about Brahmavadis and Mayavadis, but I can't remember where I read, but Srila Prabhupada also spoke about Sunyavadis. So what is the difference between a Sunyavadi and the Mayavadis and Brahmavadis?
A Shunyavadi is more like a nihilist, or one who doesn't believe in anything, or like a Buddhist. A Buddhist, they believe, of course, Buddha's form is worship so that they will eventually go have some kind of a personal aspect, but they have no conception of God. So Shunyavadis, those that believe in shunya, or emptiness. Shunyavadis are many, many different types of ignorant people.
So that means it's worse than Mayavad?
Not necessarily. Shunyavadi, if they're a Buddhist, maybe. We had one Buddhist down in San Benito, Texas, and he had a nice big garden with moringa trees and all kinds of guava fruits. We would go see him. We would say, yes, we should start an ashram. I said, yes. Say, yes, we will put Buddha. So we tried to preach to him and convince him it was Buddha, Buddha, Buddha. So, but there are other kinds of Shunyavadis, like just atheists or agnostics, that, they don't really believe in anything, but if they get some prasadam and if they get some opportunity, they actually come to the point of taking up Krishna consciousness. So they're actually, in one sense, more fortunate than the Mayavadi, because Mayavadi is very difficult for them to change. And Brahmavadi is also very difficult for them to become elevated, but sometimes they do.
Hi, Krishna, Guru Maharaj, my obeisances. I have a question. How do we engage the youth in our movement? It seems like they're not being utilized to the full potential, So what advice or comments do you have on that, so that way there's a nice segue of succession in the upcoming years?
Well, the advice is to teach Krishna consciousness in such a way that it's palatable as it can be. The problem is that society nowadays is drifting toward extreme sense gratification. I mean, more than ever before. And not only that, but an idea that, especially in the US, that, it's okay to pursue your material dreams, and this is the reality of life, and just be nice to one another. And of course, that's a little bit in the mode of goodness, but so we have to. I think the Prabhupada's formula was always a lot of prasadam, wonderful tasting prasadam, and of course now we have all these things like vegans and. Of course, some vegans are very nice because they don't want to hurt animals, but most of them carry it too far. And then we have, all kinds of different eating beliefs and thinking beliefs. And so it's a challenge. It's always been a challenge. And the challenge remains, just like Prabhupada said, my tactic is that I listen to someone for 5 minutes, I understand their philosophy, and then I defeat them. So that's the best thing. I can just sit down with someone, let them express themselves 5 minutes. We're not Prabhupada, maybe we have to wait 10 or 15 minutes to understand. And then people will be repeating themselves. They'll just go back from eating, sleeping, mating, and defending in so many different ways. And then we try to attract them. And the best philosophy is let them be happy. Srila Prabhupada said one time, let people chant Krishna consciousness and be happy. Then you can apply the rules and regulations. Let them become happy, chanting, taking prasadam. That was Prabhupada's program. Then once they want to go farther, then we give them the rules and regulations. But I think the biggest challenge is nowadays that young people are bothered by gender issues and, attracted to the opposite sex, attracted to the same sex, attracted, so many things. And it becomes a belief and a belief system. And therefore it's difficult for us to show that these are just bodily designations. So, but the best thing, make them favorable. Take as long as you need to bring them to the point where they actually inquire. And then once they inquire, give them Krishna consciousness to the greatest degree possible that they can understand. Don't try to give them too much, but don't try to give them too little. Hare Krishna. Any other question?
Just a comment. You mentioned the Olympics. There was one really famous Olympic gymnast who had won the Olympics already, and she was ready to perform, but she got completely on the mental platform and couldn't. She just withdrew. She just stopped. And some people really criticized her. Some people said she did the right thing. But I was just, remind me of it, kind of an imperfect way of Krishna is so renounced, but even a famous person can, in a kind of perverted way, demonstrate renunciation like that.
Yes. But that renunciation is usually boga tyaga. No? Yeah. After the renunciation, they want boga again. They want to enjoy.
I'm sure she'll feel, so many people will criticize her now also. So she'll get a dose of reality.
Dose of reality and a dose of humility.
Yeah.
So if there's no other question, I thank you all very much for your kind attention. And I hope to be able to explain some of these other verses, which I consider the most important verses. These verses and a few others are the ones with the longest purports by our acharyas. So they're very, very important verses by Srila Prabhupada and by all the acharyas. So I hope that I can have the opportunity to try to explain them to some degree. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Nitai Gaur Premanandi.
Sri Prasad Maharaj ki jai.
Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Maharaj, for joining us and sharing your time with us. We really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this wonderful program and for the devotees.